Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really intense topic, but we're looking at it from a completely different angle. You know, human history has some incredibly dark chapters, but rarely do we actually pause to examine them through the cold, calculated lens of a literal business model. But that's exactly what we're going to do today. We are systematically decoding a highly dense conceptual diagram that forces us to look at the transatlantic slave trade not just as history, but as a highly structured, self-sustaining corporate framework. Okay, let's just dive right into this. At first glance, this hand-drawn whiteboard diagram might just look like a messy grid to you, right? But as we unpack it together, you'll see it's actually this incredibly intricate fractal mapping of a global system of exploitation. And a fractal grid, by the way, basically means a structure where patterns repeat and connect at every single scale. So, by the end of our analysis today, you'll see exactly how this maps out one of history's greatest tragedies, literally framing it as a meticulously organized corporate marketplace. Here's our quick roadmap for decoding this whole thing. First, we'll look at the stakeholders' platform itself. Then, we'll break down the exploiters versus the exploited. Third, we'll map out the supply and customer nodes. After that, we check out providers and other parties. And finally, we pull it all together in the interconnected core.
All right, let's start right in with part one, the stakeholders' platform.
So right at the top of the board, the framing is pretty chilling. The literal title, written out in red ink, is the Slavery Stakeholders Platform, -FG. And that FG just stands for its structure, a 3x3 fractal grid. But I want you to notice the language here. It's so jarringly modern, isn't it? By calling this historical reality a platform made up of stakeholders, it instantly frames human trafficking as a highly structured operational network. It strips away all the humanity of the individuals involved, forcing us to look at the whole thing purely as a mechanism of supply, demand, and profit. It really shows how this atrocity operated just like a legitimate, fully optimized global enterprise.
Moving right along to part two, exploiters versus the exploited. Before we even start looking at the specific geographic locations, we really have to understand the human reality that brackets this entire system. On the far left, written vertically, you'll see the exploited, accompanied by a stark red minus sign. Then look all the way over on the right. In blue, we've got the exploiters paired with a blue plus sign. It's literally categorizing human beings mathematically. That red minus, it signifies a total net loss, the complete extraction of freedom, labor, bodily autonomy, and life itself. And the blue plus represents the immense profit, wealth, and power extracted directly from that loss. It absolutely epitomizes the dehumanization required to keep this machinery running, reducing millions of lives to a simple ledger of debits and credits.
Which brings us to part three, supply and customer nodes.
Okay, to understand the inner workings of the horizontal axis here, we need to decode the key scrawled at the very bottom. The letter S stands for supply, and C stands for customer. But think about what those sterile business terms actually mean in this horrific context. Supply means human beings. It means men, women, and children captured, commodified, and stockpiled for export. And the customer? That represents the colonial buyers, the plantations demanding a relentless workforce to extract cash crops from the earth. So this horizontal axis is the primary brutal transaction of the trade, a massive line of demand violently pulling human supply across the globe. And this brilliantly maps those conceptual roles straight onto real-world geography. Look at the supply node. It's anchored directly in Africa, specifically calling out Bunce Island and Sierra Leone. These were heavily fortified trading posts where human supply was warehoused. Now look directly opposite that. The customer node is over in America, specifically citing the Low Country in East Florida. These places were completely desperate for labor to run deadly plantations for rice, indigo, and eventually cotton. And that vast space in between? That represents the horrific Middle Passage, the oceanic voyage engineered solely to transport human lives from the supply node right into the agricultural infrastructure of the customer node.
Okay, part four, providers and other parties.
Let's shift our eyes to the vertical axis now to find the last two stakeholders. The P at the bottom stands for provider, and notice the word patron is written in quotes right underneath it. Then at the top, the O stands for other party. Now these are absolutely crucial, though often overlooked parts of the platform. The providers, they're the financiers, the shipbuilders, the big banking institutions, the insurance syndicates. They're the architects safely funding and protecting the entire platform from afar. And the other parties are the secondary markets and intermediaries, the peripheral colonial economies that basically fed off that main transaction by processing raw materials and moving the wealth around.
Let's look at where they sit geographically.
The provider, or patron, is located in Europe and Britain, explicitly calling out Manchester and Liverpool. I mean, these were major ports and industrial centers that built massive generational wealth by funding these voyages and manufacturing the goods traded for enslaved people. Up at the top, the other party is placed in the Caribbean, listing Caracu, Grenada, and other islands. These spots often served as brutal seasoning camps and housed insanely profitable sugar plantations. So now you see the full perimeter, right? It's a vast geographic machine powered by European capital, extracting African lives to build the foundations of American and Caribbean empires.
Finally, Part 5, the interconnected core.
So the real kicker of this whole thing is right here in the center box. Visually, it's the most dense, chaotic part of the framework. Notice how all 4 operational nodes, supply, customer, provider, and other party, collapse into this single central cell. They aren't just isolated in their geographic regions anymore. Instead, they're tangled in this dense web of arrows representing simultaneous, multidirectional interactions. Capital from the providers flows out to secure the supply. The supply is forced over to the customers. The raw goods produced by those customers flow back to the providers and other parties, which generates even more capital to restart the whole cycle. These arrows are literally a self-reinforcing engine of wealth creation and human misery, constantly accelerating. This is the exact engine that laid the groundwork for our modern global economy.
Let's just quickly review the structural logic here. Step 1, you identify the isolated geographic nodes on the outside perimeter. Step 2, you observe how those disparate roles all crash together right in the center cell. And step 3, you trace the arrows linking them all up. When you look at it this way, you see how these vastly separated locations function together as a single continuous system. And here's the really scary part. Once this platform was fully operational, it became incredibly difficult to dismantle. Why? Because every single node relied totally on the others for its continued economic survival and expansion.
By taking this historical tragedy and mapping it purely as an operational business model, it forces us to confront the cold, calculated mechanics of it all. So I want to leave you with this. What does it mean to view this historical exploitation through the modern, structural lens of a stakeholder platform? It's a really provocative question for sure, but it forces us to realize that history's greatest tragedies weren't just chaotic events, they were meticulously managed systems. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing the structures around you, and I'll see you next time.